So we just heard about active defense, and this is what the panel is going to be about, active defense, security, and the threat landscape. I'm going to invite our panel to join us on stage right now. I have Abhijit Dasgupta, who's the Global Head of Technology Risk and Control and Governance at Manpower Group. Stephen Sim, President, ISACA, Singapore Chapter. Andre Shourie, Regional Chief Information Security Officer, APAC for Schneider Electric. Chris Thomas, Senior Sales Engineer at Extra Hop Networks. Jeremy Ho, Vice President of Sales South Asia, Attivo Networks, and the moderator for the session is Andrew Milroy, Principal Advisor at CIO Academy Asia. Would you please welcome all of them to the stage with a round of applause?
I'll sit over there, yeah. I'll do Welcome, guys. So good morning, everybody. It's great to be here today to moderate a second cybersecurity panel for ConnectGov. So maybe just to talk a little bit about the difference between yesterday's and today's, because I know most of you will have been present for yesterday's session. So yesterday we talked about some of the new threats that are emerging and what we need to do about those threats. Today, we're going to focus on active defense and taking an active defense strategy. Now, what does that mean? It really means finding ways of making it much more costly and difficult for our adversaries to get to us. Now, if you think about it, it's insanely easy to launch an attack these days. You can purchase a ransomware as a service kit at a very low price, sometimes just hundreds of dollars. You can work with people inside organizations, potentially, to collude with you on attacks. You can do social engineering to find out who works for who and send out phishing emails. And if you just keep doing this over and over again, you'll find gaps. You can make sure that your attacks are launched from a jurisdiction that doesn't have an extradition treaty with Singapore or the United States. Therefore, the risk that you are taking as an attacker is remarkably low. So we need to find ways of making it more costly and difficult for attackers when they come to try to benefit from us. So, perhaps I could start with asking a question to Abhijit. So Abhijit, you've got a global role. How do you think businesses can take a more proactive, active defense approach to cybersecurity to outmaneuver their adversaries? And how, in your position, perhaps you can follow up just saying, how do you monitor threats and how do you use this intelligence you get to help you outmaneuver these adversaries and make life more difficult for them?
Thank you, Andrew. I think this is a very broad and important question. So I'll take a couple of important aspects of it. One is global, and second is proactiveness, and third is intelligent. So with my experience with this role, I would like to share a thought on
Can you bring the microphone?
People, process, and technology. I think we have heard a lot about technology today. I want to stress something on people aspect of it and process aspect of it. So when I see the global aspect, right? So when I join this role, I have a landscape of 70 countries to paint a picture. So I see it from 6 regions, and the complexity of managing the 6 regions is that there is a different culture, which is a very important element, and there are business processes which are aligned to those regions, which are very different. So it is very important for us to understand that when we are defining a cyber strategy, that we understand that what are underlying business processes, so we can left shift the strategy from a day one. So that's basically from a complexity perspective. Then from an intelligent perspective, right, when we are defining that why we need to do an active defense, is we have 2 components like environment. One is the surface web and one is a dark web. So now we are defining a strategy for surface web. And if we are defining a strategy for surface web, we really have to understand that what's going on in the dark web side. And if you really think what is changing, as Andrew has said, that the whole operating model in the dark web side has changing in a very fast manner. And some of those elements are, like previously, the weaponization of any of those vulnerabilities used to take years, but now it is basically days or months. So, and also, the cost of using those vulnerabilities are very less. So we have to basically move from reactive defense to an active defense where we start threat hunting, as we have heard in the previous talk. So it is very important for us to move into that space. And what we are trying to do is to implement the capability of processes, which is like ethical hacking, active threat modeling, to understand that what are our current asset libraries sitting inside, because we have legacy applications as well as digital applications. So the strategy we are building is to understand that how we can marry it together so that we can get that perspective.
Great, thanks for that, Abhishek. And I think another important point to make, and it's one I think that Sharif touched on a little bit earlier with the Colonial Pipeline example, is how the impact of attacks when we hit operational technology can be very great indeed for a relatively low cost to the attacker. Andre, I know that operational technology is something that you guys are in, and you're looking at ways in which you can secure that to a greater extent, and there are some huge gaps and vulnerabilities there. How can active defense be used to address some of those vulnerabilities?
Thanks, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here today as well. So when we think about the OT environment, I just want to contextualize it a little bit, right? The OT environment itself is really exciting. It's really, really, in a lot of ways, the new gold rush, the new Wild West to me. To kind of visualize it for everyone, when you think about your traditional IT environments, right? It's very much everything that's inside your corporate office. It's your HR, your procurement, your legal, everything that you need to function as an enterprise. And then the network connectivity, how those HQs connect to all the other satellite buildings, all the satellite offices out there. The OT environment, to me, is everything outside of that. It is the entire world. It is everything else that's out there. It's parks, it's hospitals, it's ports, it's a really exciting and innovative environment because the possibilities are limitless. It's very nascent, and with Industry 4.0, with all that connectivity, with that IT-OT convergence happening, this is where you start to see a lot of possibilities. You layer on that internet connectivity, that digitization. You start to realize that this is a fantastic playground, and it's very, very exciting. And I love that I'm in a company that has a significant OT environment and an OT footprint. So how do you make sense of it? How do you be proactive in that kind of environment, right? So what you have to do, at least what I think is probably a very good first step, is to bring it back into the context of your own business, right? What is it that your enterprise is trying to do? What is it that you're here to accomplish? What's your purpose? Understanding the business strategy is crucial when dealing with the OT environment because, again, it's so big that you really have to understand the context of how you're interacting or what your OT environment looks like. You have to talk to your business leaders. You have to talk to your data owners, your system owners, and understand what their strategy is. What is it that they're trying to accomplish? Because cybersecurity strategy derives from business strategy, right? So in order for you to be proactive and understand where you have to know where you're going in order to really derive and construct your cybersecurity strategy, how to protect and how to work with these business owners in collaboration for them to accomplish the strategic goals that they're trying to accomplish.
Great, thanks for that, Andre. Stephen, perhaps if I could come to you. It is, as we mentioned a bit earlier, becoming easier to launch attacks. And what we're seeing is adversaries collaborating with one another, maybe in criminal organizations that cross different geographies, sometimes nation states, right, working with multiple different kinds of organizations and individuals together to launch attacks. How can we work collectively? How can we work with different organizations as a group to take on those kinds of adversaries?
First and foremost, I'm glad to be here. Thanks, CIO Academy, for having me here. That is a good question, and definitely we can take a leaf from the ISACs, or Information Sharing Analysis Centers, that have been doing a great job on that. I have experienced firsthand how threat intelligence have been shared in those nascent groups, whether it's maritime ISACs or operational technology ISACs or FS ISAC, right? You get threat intelligence that comes to you before more details are released to public. And with that, you get a head start in terms of containing any business impact, right? Because through that threat intelligence, you can then generate threat hunting queries and then be able to contain the blast radius. So to be able to get everybody to work together, that requires definitely public-private partnership. And Singapore itself, associations, the regulators, they have been working closely together. There's been constant discussions. And in fact, in Singapore, we have this Singapore Cyber Security Inter-Association, or SCSIA, which gathers all the associates together. I mean, Andre is in many of the meetings with me as well. And we harmonize and synergize initiatives and efforts for the betterment of the whole Singapore cyber ecosystem, right?
So how do you rate Singapore's approach compared to other countries? Do you think Singapore's, pretty advanced in its approach? Or do you think there's a lot more work?
Singapore is very collaborative in its partnership, public-private partnership. I mean, I've seen competitors even coming together, working together. So, for instance, OTISAC, it organizes conversations between the OT vendors, Schneider Electric, Siemens, together with the OT customers. So I think earlier on CrowdStrike, I think there was a detailed presentation on how software supply chain attacks are increasingly prominent. And with that in mind, there is a need to ensure that there is a stronger collaboration between the customers and the vendors. And these information sharing analysis centers, what they do is they allow anonymity when you review any breaches and inside information. So the attribution element is covered because there are guardrails and there's intel sharing protocols. And when folks come together, there's Chatham House rules. So you get to actually discuss more insights and details. And the vendors know where the enterprises are coming from in terms of their needs and the problem statements. Whereas the consumers, they can then understand how the vendors can help them. And this close collaboration is also important in terms of tabletop exercises, in terms of incident response management, because we are all part of an integrated supply chain. It's no longer sufficient for someone to respond to an incident in silo. You need a collaboration. And for instance, if there is a zero-day vulnerability, if there is a zero-day TTP, techniques and protocols, when it is shared, their customers can take early actions to contain the incident before it laterally moves into the crown jewels.
Great. Thanks for that, Stephen. So, Jeremy, maybe if I could ask you a question that I suspect is close to your heart, the question I'm about to ask, but there's a bunch of techniques we can use to try to make it harder for our adversaries, and one of the techniques that's commonly talked about is the use of decoys and deception as a way of doing this. Can you just talk to us a bit about how decoys and deception can be used?
Sure, happy to do that. I guess I come to the first word I'm going to use here is disruption.
Yeah.
Right. And this resonates with me very well in the organization that I work for. And coming back to the topic that we have on the panel, active defense. The very word active defense, and earlier I heard about proactive defense, right? It's all about disruption. How are we going to disrupt the adversary? I guess a lot of us, we come from the world whereby we are reacting. We are still reacting. We are trying to reduce the mean time to detect. But I guess where I'm coming from in my organization is we are introducing technology that's going to disrupt the attacks. And going back to what Andy you spoke about, decoys, deception technology. Yep, so this is what we do. So think about it, right? We're going to set up traps. We're going to set up deception technology, right? For any one of us here in the audience that do fishing, you know what is it like? We put on a bait, a live bait. And if there is any adversary that got attracted to that particular crown jewel, fake crown jewel, we will be questioning why.
Yeah.
And I'll draw back again to what some of the panelists talk about, threat intelligence. And this is the entire ecosystem, whereby I've got something here. This adversary or malware is interested in this particular bit. This IOC, this threat intel, will further augment the entire ecosystem that kinds of connect back again to the, like what some of the presentations that was talking about, XDR,
Yes.
threat hunting, in the assumed breach environment. So this is what my organization is all about. And for anyone that has special interest in active defense, I will also direct you to MITRE, MITRE Engage. It used to be called MITRE Shield. And there's whole research topic, matrix about deception, about active defense. So that's a very good place to start.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Obviously, I mean, threat intelligence is a key tool in any approach to active defense, but it seems that a lot of the intelligence we've got is either inadequate or not used as effectively as it should be used to ward off or respond to attacks. So Chris, maybe if I could bring you in, how do you think that the use of AI and machine learning can help us with threat intelligence and also help us to enhance and improve the kinds of detection and response approaches that we take?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I think that's a very interesting question, because when we talk about threat intelligence, for the most part, a lot of people are sort of referring to lists of IP addresses or domains that get shared as an indicator of compromise. And that's great for being able to sweep through an environment and look to see if you've got any instances of communications to those domains or IPs. That didn't really help the first person that got hit though, right? Because that IC didn't exist yet. So that kind of threat intelligence is really, it's good to help us react after an attack's occurred. But I think someone else mentioned already the MITRE attack frameworks, things like that, where MITRE organisation takes the information from attacks and from real-world incidents and doesn't just produce the IOCs and the actual indicators, the IP addresses, etc., but maps together the actual techniques and things that organisations or that attackers are using inside an organisation in that post-breach, and someone mentioned post-breach mindset as well, right? So once the attacker gets inside, they start using the tools that are inside the organisation to act on their mission, right? You've got the different stages of the attack that they refer to through your reconnaissance and internal reconnaissance and lateral movement and exploitation, moving into data staging and things like that to get to exfiltration and your action on objective. I think where AI and ML can help is by understanding what the normal interactions inside an organisation look like and start building out baselines of regular activities, whether that's my normal activities or my peer group's regular activities, so it can form what looks like the normal patterns for that organisation, and using the models with the right data being fed to them to help surface up the anomalies or the things that are different. And it's not necessarily that once something gets bubbled up as being an anomaly that it's a bad thing. It can just be a change in behaviour. It can be an administrator doing a task they've always done but doing it in a different way. And it's the context we need to provide to be able to investigate and see what's going on there, to differentiate between an attacker doing something living off the land and the tools inside the organisation versus an administrator. So it's important to be able to see not just the intelligence and how that comes into play, but also how it applies to the actual organisation.
Great, thanks, Chris. So Abhijit, just in your organisation and your role, one of your challenges must be having the right talent to basically make the most of the kinds of technologies we've been talking about, and to know what to do with it and have the policies in place that align with that technology. How do you grapple with this? Are you struggling with talent? I know we're going to talk about it a bit more later, but how do you grapple with this particular issue?
Yeah, I think talent is an issue across the board. I think we have heard in all the talks. And in same, we are also facing, like, we are being covering 24/7 across the globe. So what we have done is we have implemented a 4B capability metrics in Manpower. So we call it as build the talent, buy the talent, borrow the talent, and bridge the talent. So the build the talent is very important. Like we have to have a constant mechanism through which basically we enhance the technical learning. Both soft skill and hard skill learning is very important as the technology is evolving every day. And then we basically buy the talent wherever we do an assessment, and which is an ongoing assessment based on the threat, based on the business strategy. As we are looking forward for quarter by quarter, we understand that what is the gap and where we are sourcing those talent from outside. And the third component is very important, which is basically a borrow a talent, where we have to have a partnership, build an ecosystem where we get the partners, technology partners, industry partners, and the associations through which we understand the threat landscape, we understand the new technology which is coming in, and then they can participate in some of the POCs, understand what are the strategies which are going to build. And last on the least is basically to bridge the talent. The bridge talent is a component where I think we have discussed a lot, that until unless you have a cross-functional team, which is basically moving from your business and operations side into a cyber side, it is very, very difficult for us to understand the business side of the risk, because many of these elements are people-oriented and behavior-oriented. So what we are trying to do, an effort to basically promote a talent from a business and operation people to move into the security side of it so that we can basically bridge that gap.
Great, thanks for that. One of the, the main things that Sharif was talking about was XDR, the concept of it, and it's really expanding EDR, endpoint detection and response, to address the Internet of Things, cloud, networks, and so forth. As a CIO, as you start dealing with the Internet of Things and other forms of operational technology, and trying to detect and respond to threats hitting that, what kind of changes do you, I'm going to ask this question to you, Andre, what kind of changes do you think a CIO needs to make? What recommendations would you make to CIOs? Because typically a lot of CIOs have been very focused just on IT, but increasingly as we move more into this digitization of the physical world with the Internet of Things, they're having to change their approaches. So from your experience, given that you've covered both, what do you think they need to understand? What changes do they need to make?
Sure. I think just a friendly piece of advice for all the CIOs and CISOs out there that have and operate OT environments, that have a significant OT, or are thinking of moving to that space, or your company's thinking of moving to that space. It's really beneficial to know that environment, to become very familiar with it. So I would actually encourage all of you that have the opportunity to do so, to spend some time in that environment. Really, really go in there, immerse yourself in it invest the time in it, speak to the stakeholders, speak to the production site owner, the plant owner, speak to the maintenance people, maybe understand a lot of their pain points and their needs and their requirements. Even speak to the rank and file people, the production, the production engineers and the production line workers, because by gaining that kind of insight and that understanding of that environment, that really helps you then to start to think strategically and start to think about, and if you want to do security by design, you really have to also put that into your policies. You really have to stress that as part of the rule set and the framework that you govern your organization with. So by understanding that environment, you're going to come up with policies that are hopefully going to be a lot more sensible. They're going to make sense not just to the IT environment that prizes the confidentiality, integrity, and availability in the IT world. But when you get to the OT world, number one is safety, right? It's not any of the CIA. And then the second one, the number two priority is availability. So you have to design your policies to support those concepts as well, right? Otherwise, they'll end up being somewhat useless. They're going to be ignored, or they're just going to be impossible to implement. And then once you have those policies, then you can start designing your programs. I think that Sharif and CrowdStrike did a fantastic job of explaining DevSecOps. I was you know, when you talk about shift left, that's really around that topic, but he's done a wonderful job of that, so I won't rehash it. But what I will add to that, though, is if you want to have, you know, kind of that prediction and that crystal balling and to understand what's coming in order to have a more effective cybersecurity or even an operations program for your environment, I would also add on that you should encourage or you should create environments by which your developers are allowed to innovate. Remember what I said earlier about the OT environment being this open world that you can have immense amounts of innovation. There's so many opportunities out there. So create an environment by which they can play, you know, have that landing zone, have that sandbox environment so that your developers can now come and do their innovation there. And then while you secure that, of course, you also get to monitor that environment. So you start to see what are the ideas and things that are coming up with. How does that align with the business strategy and your cybersecurity strategy, right? And then you can also start to think about how you can interact with these things. So you really get that roadmap, and you start to see, you know, a lot of the things that are coming your way. And again, you're right in the initial stages of the design phase, right? And you're all the way through as well as Sheriff explained in the DevSecOps. But make sure that when you say you're going to introduce security early, that you're really introducing security early. Create that environment for them, and then start having conversations later on about, you know, security controls throughout that pipeline.
Great, thanks, Andre. I mean, to your point about you know, DevSecOps and shifting left, I think it also plays a critical role in any active defense strategy, which is a question I just want to pose to you, Stephen. So how do you think organizations in Singapore can better embrace the kind of shift left approach to secure their IT systems by design and bake security into the code?
First and foremost, your enterprise risk appetite is your North Star. It is the guiding light. Your goalposts should be set firmly in place first. If not, it's going to be a moving target. So in ISACA itself, we believe not in risk reduction because there is no 100% security, and it's a bottomless pit. You keep putting in controls. How many endpoint solutions are you going to put on your endpoint, right? So we believe in risk optimization because as a business, you need to take some risk. The same way we drive cars to work, right? We don't just walk to work because we are afraid of getting into an accident. Yeah. So risk governance is definitely a key thing. And first and foremost, definitely the whole 9 yards as part of that governance is identifying your assets, like what Andre has shared earlier, classification of assets, the business impact analysis, followed by threat modeling. And what fits into this threat modeling is threat intelligence. Yeah. Right? Threat intelligence becomes very important as part of the active cyber defense. And when we talk about shift left, one point I want to add to what Andre has shared earlier is that it is important not just to look at SDLC, right? It is not just about writing secure code and so forth. Yeah. It's about having feedback channels from your threat intelligence, having the active cyber defense put in place. If you don't have the ability to initiate security events, if the application doesn't send out security events, there's going to be an issue later on, right? If you don't have zero trust principles put in place, you're going to have issues with containing the blast radius when there is a ransomware outbreak. If you look at what happened in NotPetya back in 2017, that was one of the first software supply chain attacks. It took just 7 minutes for 45,000 endpoints and 4,000 servers to be encrypted. So how can an analyst be able to contain it fast enough? That's why that whole active defense cycle and the assume breach approach that Jeremy was talking about is important. You need the threat intelligence as inputs to be able to hunt for queries, to be able to integrate all this into SOAR, security orchestration and automated response, to be able to disrupt the attack, right? Disrupt the cyber kill chain before it literally moves into crown jewels. And just one key point I want to add, one more point is with the decoys. Yeah. Decoys are actually very important. How many of us, when we see a data breach or data leak, are you able to tell whether that data leak is coming from a compromise from your servers or from some database outside that collated your information? How do you know when your database was breached? That's the reason why I think honey tokens or canary tokens or that you put inside your databases, that becomes very important. Make it time sensitive.
Yeah.
When there's a leak and you see that token somewhere outside, you know it is due to a breach in your database and not due to a collation of data, due to a repackaging of old data breaches. Yeah.
Great.
So essentially, I think that the risk governance perspective is important. And I would just want to add on is that it's not just about security by design, it's also security in deployment. Security is a continuous journey. It's not just about doing things right from the start and then fire and forget. It is about continuously maintaining that security posture, because if you don't, it's going to deteriorate, mistakes are going to be made. So we have seen how many misconfigured cloud setups, right? So continuous governance, continuous citing of SOC 2, Type 2 opinion reports, VAPT reports, and perform purple teaming. This is actually, in my perspective, that is also shift left, because you need to know your enemies, you need to know yourself, where are your gaps and so forth, to close those gaps and feed that with through threat intel and test your environment with those TTPs and so forth, to be able to better secure it as part of security by design. It's always a cycle.
Great. Thanks for that, Stephen. So maybe, Jeremy, if I could move on to you to ask you another question. So there's always a big issue with false positives. And when you're using deception and decoys, what are some of the main challenges? Do you find is there a risk of non-malevolent actors or just regular employees or customers falling into these traps? How do you manage that challenge and others associated with decoys and deception?
Happy to address that. In fact, this is always a very key topic. It's a very broad topic, right? False positive. I guess in interest of time, right? How about let me start by organizations that adopt deception technology. Right. I'll start with the fact that I have organizations as small as 170-man shop. Naturally, security is a part-time job for the IT department, but they are sensitive, right? They do see security as a very important element. So definitely, false positive things like this is not something that they can manage. So again, what's happening right now is that they do see a value here, because for the very fact that the technology that we put in place is not relying on signatures, behavior-based. This is just good old putting in the decoys that is highly interactive. If anything that fall into the deception platform, they know that there is something fishy. All right, so that reduces the fact that they need to go through logs, correlation, analysis. They will have to go in for investigation. And this ties in very, very well with the overall operation, where it can automate threat hunting, right? Because this is very contextualizing threat intelligence, right? Earlier, I'm a big fan of threat intel, right? So this kind of contextualize a lot of things. And that is where we help them reduce the mean time to detect very well. This is really the I would say, operationalizing deception. I guess this is probably the best example, right? Of course, that's where we have other organizations such as the big ones, where they have threat hunters, 24/7 operations. They have all the different technology layered defense. And definitely, in this case here, the whole ballgame is going to be very different. Whenever we talk about reducing false positive, giving contextual threat intelligence, high fidelity alerts. So I guess this is where a lot of organizations is now looking into this piece of technology as part of active defense. And I use this word again, disruption. Today in this conference, I'm hearing a lot of tech companies, right? Blockchain and all this. It's all about disruptions. And this is where I'm very excited about my organization in what we are doing, because it's about time that we go out there and disrupt the adversary. And this is active defense.
Easier said than done, though. But that's a new kind of strategy that organizations certainly need to think about. But I think one of the other challenges is just the huge amount of data that's coming in that security professionals have to deal with, and it's not just the risk of false positives. that we've mentioned. It's also prioritizing those threat alerts and deciding which ones to focus on and to put your resources into. So Chris, can I ask you how you think organizations can address this issue of just prioritizing the threats?
I wish I could come up with the silver bullet answer for that, because I'd be
sure
a very
there's no
rich man.
perfect solution.
We'll go home, right? I think some of the comments have been said earlier on the panel as well around automating what you can, using the information that you've got. The threat intelligence information is one thing. So let's use an example. If an analyst has, or a workflow that you've defined, what happens if there's an alert for a data exfiltration event? Right? What do you do next? How do you investigate that? So you can use technologies to help bring together information from across the environment. Like, okay, there was data exfiltration from this particular system. What was that system doing leading up to this event? Right? So bringing together either related detections or data from the other systems, and that's where the CrowdStrike presentation before, where the XDR comes in as well, having all the data available to make sure that you can actually investigate. But then also making sure that by the time it gets to an analyst to look at it, as much of that investigation of pulling data together from different sources has been automated so that the analyst doesn't have to do that every single time. So automating those mundane, repeatable tasks is a big part to that. Yeah. The other side of it is the prioritization is the golden goose. How do you prioritize events? And ideally, you've got some idea of high-value assets or critical assets inside the organization, whether they're on-premise, in the cloud, or wherever that crown jewels or sensitive information is. Most organizations I talk to, when you ask for a list of critical assets, you ask 5 people, you get 10 different lists. So being able to actually consolidate and agree on higher value assets is a key element first.
That's a very good point. So I'm just going to ask you a tricky one here, Abhijit. So with a global role, how do you decide what the critical, is the consensus around the critical assets, and is the consensus around what an approach to active defense? My sense is there's a few challenges there.
I think there are challenges all over the place, but and today I'd like to highlight 2. One, we discussed that technology is not a support function anymore. It's a business enabler, right? Yes. So the thing starts from understanding the business strategy and aligning the technology strategy to that. So that's the first challenge, that how aligned is the technology strategy? And based on that, how aligned is our risk strategy and the cybersecurity strategy? So once we understand that on an annual basis, then how you translate that technology and the risk strategy into your DevOps environment. And you have to understand your ecosystem, because your ecosystem, again, is a hybrid, which is legacy and digital, right? So the translation of that is critical, and it's challenging. And the third part is that once you understand how to basically operationalize it, the skill component is that whether you have the right skill at 24/7 to operate that.
Yeah. And Andre, can I just ask you a similar question? How do you get consistency across the organization in its approach to active defense or cybersecurity posture, basically?
It's important to, I think, in order to optimize that kind of response, you have to really identify the roles and responsibilities, right? Identify your strategic partners in that journey. And make sure that they understand and train them to be able to react to all of this information that's coming at them. Some of the other things that, of course, we covered earlier, I think are pretty crucial and worth repeating, having that automated response, your SOARs, SOARs, being able to better utilize AI and ML as it matures and comes in. And of course, being able to have that mature threat intelligence program as well, which was also identified earlier. But more importantly, being able to utilize the information, as was indicated earlier, in your part of your adaptive and active defense. So it's great to have all of this intelligence coming out, but what do you do with it, right? So maybe also think about things like having automated responses in your perimeter as well, things like automatic updates to your firewall rules based on TTPs and IOCs that are coming out of your threat intelligence program. I think all that factors in as well.
Yeah, I think those are some great points to finish on. There's a whole bunch of issues around active defense and some challenges associated with it, but I think one of the key ones is just making sure that you're able to act on that intelligence that you get, automating as much of it as you possibly can, and using some of these proactive decoy deception type techniques, as much as you can. So on that note, Chris, Andre, Stephen, Jeremy, Abhijit, thank you very much for your very valuable insights. I think this has been a great discussion. So thank you very much, and thanks everybody. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you, panel. We invite you to take your seats back at your tables. Great discussion, as always. Thanks, Andrew.